From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
And now I want to introduce Linda Ronstadt, one of the most celebrated singers of our generation. Thank you so much. Thank you. She said, I have friends out there.
I do.
Pop, rock, country, ranchera, classic, jazz, you name it, she sang it, and she was the most versatile singer in America, and we're grateful to all the joy that you brought to us for a very long time.
Thank you so much.
And we snagged her from Arizona to Washington today because she just wrote a book, in case you didn't hear. Simple Dreams, a musical memoir. And so today we're going to talk up here for a little bit, and then we have 2 mics. We'll get time for some questions.
All righty.
Do you have any memorable mic failures when you were singing with the Eagles, for instance, or any of the other people?
You know, when you are a professional, you learn that you're never going to be working at any kind of optimum situation. There's always going to be, the sound is always going to not work. You're always going to be in a room that isn't good for, for sound, that doesn't have good acoustics. And there's always going to be a lot of distractions, and there's always going to be that thing humming over there. And you just have to do it. You just have to step up to the plate and swing. You do your best. You do your best shot. Professionals, well, thank you. I mean, musicians play so much that they learn it's in their muscles. They know how to feel it because you don't ever get a break from hearing it. And you just learn that you're going to be able to do your best 78, 90%, it's going to be in that range somewhere. You only do 100% when you're rehearsal. That's why I like rehearsal. When people say, come to my show, I always say, can I come to the rehearsal?
What was it like to have the Eagles as your backup band?
Well, it sort of it arrived in increments. I was walking through the Troubadour one night, and I heard a band called Shiloh. And I was looking for a drummer, and their drummer was really good. And I said, that's exactly the style I need. I'm going to go talk to him, see if I can get him away from this band, Shiloh. So I went, and the guy's name was Don Henley. And so I said, I want to come on. I got a tour coming up. Why don't you come out on the road with me? And then I needed a guitar player because I had Bernie Ledden working in my band, but he'd gone off to play with the Flying Burrito Brothers, and he wasn't available. So I was going out with this guy, J.D. Souther, that I lived with, and he had a duet with this guy named Glenn Fry, who was a really good guitar player. I said, hey, maybe we can get Glenn, to do Bernie's part. So we hired Glenn. Glenn and Bernie were rooming together. Glenn and Don were rooming together on the road. We didn't have enough money in those days for everybody to have their own room, so everybody had to double up, except for me. I got my own room, which I shared with my panda and my teddy bear. And Don and Glenn started writing songs together. It was Glenn that discovered that Don could sing, because we never heard him sing. He was behind the drums, and it's unusual for a drummer to sing. Glenn discovered that Don could not only sing, but he was a really good singer and a really good writer. So they started writing songs together, and they wanted to form a band together. So John Boylan, who was over there helping with the sound, who was my manager and producer at the time, and he said, I'll tell you what, he said, we need a band for a while, and it's going to be a while before you guys can get your band together and get a record deal. So while you're doing that, we'll just work together. But we have some suggestions for who you should put in your band. So he suggested Randy Meisner, the bass player, and I suggested to get Bernie, because I wanted Bernie to start with. And Bernie and Glenn was just an added bonus. So we hired Bernie, and we hired Randy, and we started playing shows together. And then they would open. I mean, they were like, or they didn't open. They had they put songs in the show. So they just kept growing this catalog of stuff. Pretty soon they're just kind of regularly blowing me off the stage, but I didn't care. I was loving it. So, and the minute they started playing, we knew they were going to be. We knew they were going to be a success. There was just no keeping that music down. It was really good harmony singing, really good songwriting, really good playing, and the rest is history.
You hung out with so many, I suppose they're saying they hung out with you, but Jackson Browne, Emmylou Harris, Rosemary Clooney, you had so many, Any of those great stories that come back about big moments that you remember with your collaborators?
Well, I first met, there it is. I first met Jackson Browne when he was 17 and I was 18. And he was already writing brilliant songs. He wrote a song called, he had already written a song called These Days, which was a song that I loved, or Opening Farewell, which is still one of his best songs ever. And it didn't mean that he started writing crappy songs after that. It just meant that he was already up here. And it kept going, and it has never stopped. He's really an extraordinary talent and a very good person, I think. So, I was just astonished that somebody that young was writing, especially he was younger than I was, by a year, and was just writing at that level. And when I got to California, I was just astonished at the level of talent. I mean, the first guitar player that I met over there was Ry Cooder, and I just went, well, they don't come any better than that. He's in the great master category, and he was very young then and playing his ass off. He just played like a demon. So it was a real experience going from Tucson, where we played and we sang and we plunked around. And then all of a sudden it was this other level of professionalism and brilliance, very intimidating.
Where do you run into Jackson Browne when you're 18?
He came over to my house, Somebody brought a Pam Poland. I was singing a song that Pam Poland had written that I met her through Kenny Edwards, who was one of the Stone Ponies. I mean, just all musicians kind of knew each other in those days, We hung out in the same clubs, and we'd find each other in the same old funky, places to eat that, you could get meat and 3 for $5, and we relied on those kind of places. So.
You talk in your book about that whole era, which is so interesting. A lot of sex, drugs, rock and roll. I mean,
not so much of that. I mean, I get this with every interview. It's like, well, you're all out there having orgies and smoking a big spliff, and I'm doing a line of coke. Did I ever take drugs? You bet I did. I tried everything. Not everything. I didn't try injectables, but my addiction, I have to say, is reading. And if I smoke a joint, I'd start the sentence and it would melt away. I'd forget the beginning of the sentence by the time I got to the end of the sentence. Cocaine just made me real nervous and talk really fast. I got enough of that going on in my life anyway. I didn't need it. So, I was the one that was knitting and reading. And the band, I had a pretty refined band, the guys in my band, Kenny Edwards, who was in the Stone Ponies to start with, is a very intellectual guy. He's a big reader, highly literate, very well educated. Serious guy with a very refined sensibility. Don Grolnick, my piano player, used to have articles written about him when he was a kid as the smartest kid on Long Island. His IQ was up in the 180s somewhere. And he's the one that turned me on to Anna Karenina. I read that because of him. And he was a brilliant guy with these guys are gig musicians. They have to have their body and their soul and their mind all knit together in order to do their job, or otherwise they just wash out. I know there are rock and roll bands that have these relationships. Parkinson's moment here. The stories about them is that they, are wrecking hotel rooms and stuff like that. Reputation was the word I was trying to find.
But were other people?
But we weren't like that.
Touring with you, knitting and reading Anna Karenina?
The boys weren't knitting a lot, but they were reading Anna Karenina, or they were reading The Magic Mountain, or they were reading The Heart of Darkness. We traded books around. They were mostly readers.
Really interesting.
The drummers didn't always read. The drummers were not the literate ones, but they weren't stupid either. The drummers did something else. I don't know. They communicated in another way. Piano players always read. Bass players usually read. It's funny, they fall into funny little categories, but the piano player is always the grown-up guy, that has to keep everything together. He's like the catcher, You're watching baseball and the pitcher goes over to the catcher goes over to the pitcher to try to calm him down. The lead guitar player is the pitcher, and he gets really rattled and starts playing just way too many notes. And you see the piano player go over there to sort of settle him down and kind of negotiate between him and the bass player, It's the way it works.
You write in your book about, every man in America was in love with you, including my husband.
Millions were not in love, and many men in particular were not in love, including many that I sent my cap for, believe me. Much to my chagrin, they were not in love with me.
But many were, and you wrote, you're famously, this is a political town, and you were going out with Jerry Browne, who was the governor, who's again the governor, and you wrote this lovely passage about Jerry Browne. He was smart and funny, not interested in drinking or drugs, and lived his life carefully with a great deal of discipline. This was different from a lot of men I knew in rock and roll, and I found it a relief.
Well, I'm a Democrat. You can tell that, right? I'm going to make him look good so I can get reelected.
What was it like to be in the thick of politics there? Here you were a music icon and hanging.
I wasn't involved in politics. I did not get involved in his life. I just didn't, you know.
But when
his wife is very involved in his life. That's why she's his wife. And she's a really nice person. I like her a lot. She can take it.
But at the time, you were, people called you the First Lady of California.
No, I mean, it was just silly, you know. We just hung out. We dated. We were sweethearts. We had a really good time together. You know, but I was not involved in his politics. I was not that involved in his professional life. He wasn't involved in my professional life at all. He didn't have any understanding of it, you know. We met over there somewhere. I've never heard him sing. He likes flamenco music. Jerry likes passionate music. He likes passionate music, passionate women. You know, that's his deal. In case you wondered. He likes flamenco. Write it down. Likes flamenco.
You got to add comedy to ranchera.
He likes poetry too, and he reads it very well.
How is it possible that you never got married with all these people?
I didn't need to get married. It just wasn't a requirement for me. You know, I had some really nice boyfriends. I'm not dissing it. I have great respect for people that are able to do the kind of compromise and really build each other up. You know, I think the only reason to be with somebody is they make you a better person, you make them a better person. But I was busy running around, you know, so fast, and I did have a number of nice boyfriends that lasted pretty long. But, you know, I have a lot of friends that are married, and they tried really hard to make it work, and they didn't, and then they had to figure out who got the sofa and who got the pan and who got the this and that. I just, when it was done with, and I didn't have to do that. Thank God. You know. I'm a kind of a believer in serial monogamy, with an emphasis on the serial. I'm not talking about Cheerios.
When was the last time you were in Washington, or do you have memories from touring here or coming here in the past?
Well, you know, you asked me if I, you know, like from touring, if I had memories of seeing Washington. You know, there's an opening passage in The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This is a reading group, so I know I can make a literary reference here, where he talks about how provincial a sailor's life is. And you think, provincial? They go all over the world, you know. But the thing is, most of the time they're on the boat, which is the same group of, you know, scabby old guys, you know, and they're hanging out with each other. And they've got their group dynamics there on the boat. And then they get to the harbor, and the harbors are the same all over the world, disturbingly much like airports are now, you know. It's the same old grog shops and the same old chicks and the same old whatever they find. And they don't go beyond the harbor to explore what's going on in the interior of the country. They just come in and, you know, change their supplies. So we really were very insular in that way. You know, rock and roll band touring is pretty insular. There's the bus, there's the hotel, there's the sound check, there's the show, and there's afterward in the hotel where you spend most of your time hanging out and playing music. Because that's all musicians ever want to really do is just pick. And so people are writing songs, and people are figuring out harmonies, and people are showing each other songs. And we often would play a lot of other people's songs. We wouldn't play our own songs because we were tired of them. So we'd be playing, you know, songs from Motown or Everly Brothers songs or Hank Williams songs or Merle Haggard songs or whatever, you know, working out the harmonies. And that's how you get your basement. That's the fundamentals of your craft. You're honing it always. So there wasn't a lot of time for exploring.
You were on the cover of Time magazine in 1977. You were in every city. Those posters of you were everywhere. And then we didn't hear from you for a long time. What was that like to be in, you know, ultra limelight, and then kind of you went back home to?
Well, I had children. You know, they came into my life, and they came in my house, and I had to feed them and, you know, do stuff with talk to them. And they wanted me there in the morning, and they wanted me still there at night. You know, it's kind of a shock, but there I was. So I changed my life rather dramatically. I stopped touring, I stopped recording, I stopped everything. And then I eventually went back to touring in summertime when they got in school. So because they could go with me. And they loved touring because I don't have TV at my house or any computers. They weren't allowed any of that stuff. So they got in the bus, and there was a big TV screen, and they were like, oh, great. We always knew, we always heard about this, you know. They heard about TV, they were in heaven. And I got them a lot of games and stuff like that. Like, I didn't ever let them play with Legos or any weird plastic toys. You know, I wanted to play with real stuff. I wanted to play with clay and beeswax and make stuff. And they did all that. But then when they found out about Legos and that's awful colors that Legos come in, and those hideous shapes, you know, it's just so regimental. It's all the same kind of basic shape. I think it's what's happened to it's what's happened to architecture today. Is all those architects played with Legos, and they can only make these squares that go like that. I hate Legos.
Do you like the buildings in Washington?
Well, some of them. I don't like the Washington, what is that big phallic pointing thing, the Washington Monument. I don't like that so much. The Lincoln Memorial is pretty, and the Capitol is pretty, and so, you know, I like old architecture. I like anything before World War I is pretty good. And I can just kind of drag it up to 1929 when the crash happened, you know. But after that, it's kind of pathetic. It's sort of sad. I don't like modern architecture.
We got that. That's so your kids, you adopted 2 kids, and they're 19 and 22 now?
They're 19 and 22, yeah.
Does it get easier as they get older to be
I
moms?
think it gets harder. I mean, I thought, whoa, you know, after the diaper thing and the toddler thing, we have to be chasing after him all the time. I got my son when he was 11. I got him a bus pass. I said, you're on your own, kid. You know, I hope you can find your way. Here's your bus pass. And he did. He was great. He was very independent. You know, but he always came home at night because he had to eat. And now he doesn't do that. He got a girlfriend, and she's really nice. He's moved in with her, and we just packed him up last Sunday and moved him into with the girlfriend. So it's going to be a new thing. I'm going to go home. I'm going to be half an empty nester. My daughter's halfway moved out. She lives in a little cottage on my property, but she has mercifully her own kitchen, so she won't mess up mine. I'm a Dutch housewife, man. I run a tight ship. I don't like any dirt or any clutter in my house. Can't leave any dirty dishes out. I have a fit. So she goes out to her own little house and just piles up the dishes as much as she wants.
Do you have a lot of music in your house? What do you listen to?
I don't listen to music at home very much. I don't like recorded music very much. Is this still working? It's working. I don't like recorded music very much. I like live music because when I was recording, it was always live, you know. I know it sounds weird for a recording artist to not like recorded music, but I like it as a living thing that changes all the time, and it's a plastic, you know, moving thing.
Have you stayed in touch, and do you still meet up with some of the old gang?
Oh, I do. I saw J.D. Souther last night. I had dinner with him. And I see Emmylou Harris a lot, and I saw Jackson Browne not too long ago. You know, I mean, that was a huge part of my social life because musicians go over to each other's house and hang out for hours, but they don't do a lot of talking. They do a lot of playing, and then the talking just kind of fits in the little cracks here and there. You know, you get to talk about where you got your new shoes or what your child is doing or you broke up with your boyfriend or whatever it is, but it just fits in between the next song you play. So if I had to go over to somebody's house and just sit there and talk to them solid, I wouldn't know what to say. There would be these big lags in the conversation where the song is supposed to be.
Why did you decide to write this book?
Wow, good question. Well, first of all, I was out to dinner. I was at a dinner, and I looked to my left, and there was Michael Pollan, who I'm a very huge fan of, and I just read The Botany of Desire 3 times, and I went, oh my God, I'm sitting next to Michael Pollan. So he was talking to me, and he said, you think you're going to write a memoir? And I went, oh, come on, I have no craft. I'm not a writer like you. I don't know anything about writing. I've never even written, I never kept a diary. I never kept a journal. I've never written anything except a thank you note, which I do very well with my fountain pen, you know. So he said, well, I think everybody has one good story they can tell, even without learning to be the craft of writing. I think you have one good story you can tell. So I thought about that, and about a week later, I got a letter from one of the major publishing houses that included a book by Renee Fleming and one by Roseanne Cash. And it said, you know, here's a book that Renee Fleming wrote about being a soprano all her life and what her process was in becoming a singer. And here's another one by Roseanne Cash, who's a very sort of discreet book about her life. And I loved both of the books, thought they were great. And I said, maybe I could write a book like this if I stuck to the work, you know, and I just stuck to the music and then I thought, well, what did I do that was different from other people? Because I'm not the greatest pop singer that ever lived. I didn't redefine pop music or anything like that. I'm just one of many, and there are a lot of better singers than I am. But what I thought I did was I was the most diverse singer. I did the most harebrained, half-witted, next leap that you'd never be able to figure out. So, and I wanted to write why those musical selections weren't arbitrary, and, why they were deliberate choices, and what there was in my background that was the foundation for it, and then how I went from each thing to the next thing, along my little path. I mean, they weren't career moves, believe me. I wasn't sitting there going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop singing in English, and I'm only going to sing in Spanish. And in addition to that, I'm going to sing these obscure, traditional Mexican songs that nobody's ever heard unless you live on a ranch someplace in Pitiquito. And that's going to be a good career move. It just wasn't like that. My record company had a fit. They couldn't believe I was doing it. But it was music that I was just completely passionate about, and I wasn't going to let anybody get in my way to sing it. I had to sing it or I was going to die.
I think a lot of people think that you were so fabulously successful and admired that you have a huge amount of money, but I've read that you've said that it's actually the songwriters, not necessarily the singers, that make the money.
Yeah, I'm not poor. The fellow you must have got that out of the New York Times. The fellow in the New York Times seems to think that I'm A, broke, and B, a drug addict, a recovering drug addict. I was neither. I saved my money and was pretty careful. I can't live like I used to live, but people think that just because you had a record out that you have hundreds of millions of dollars or even tens of millions of dollars. It just isn't true. I'm not going to, I'll be fine, I think, but as long as my kids don't spend too much money. But they're not big spendthrifts. So, but I was mainly complaining to him about the real estate prices in San Francisco where I live, which is ridiculous. You can't, a starter house in San Francisco with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms is like $5 million, in a nice neighborhood. It's ridiculous. So I was whining about that, so I guess he decided I was broke. Why couldn't I afford a $20 million house? Oh, gee. I must have snorted it.
Do you think the music industry has changed since the 70s and 80s, the economics of it?
Oh, it's completely different. There's a really good book I recommend, by the way. I think it's an important book by Jaron Lanier. It's called Who Owns the Future? And Jaron Lanier was a guy who really built a lot of the internet, and he developed the idea of he's one of those Silicon Valley guys, tech scientist, computer scientist, and he also developed virtual reality and named it virtual reality. And and he's also one of the rare Silicon Valley lefties that's who's pro-labor and really believes that we should all get paid for our work and paid in some kind of way that we can sustain a living. And he feels that the internet, as much as he loves it and as much as he was a part of developing it, is going to deliver hyper unemployment in the future, and is delivering it now, in fact. And he used the record business as the prime example for his book. The record business, the photo business, the publishing business going down, because we have Kindles. I read a Kindle too. And we have Amazon, because we have these super servers that are just, charging you a lot of money to get stuff, but they're uploading for free. And so nobody's getting paid for the content that they're uploading. And that's been the case in spades with music. The music business is completely different. The record business, as I knew it, is completely gone. Now, some of that might be good, but there were some good gatekeepers out there. There were some true record men that would work on the hunch and the rush and that really had great intuition and knew what a good song was. Now we don't have any gatekeepers, the same way with the newspaper. If we need the New York Times editorial board to start, and some fact checkers to see what's out there, We need them. And we're not getting it with the internet. So, the internet is a great, wonderful, shiny, bright thing to have, but what's the price you pay? And the price we pay, I think, it may turn out to be much too dear for what we lose.
I'm going to ask people that if they want to ask a question, they can line up at these mics. We have about 15 minutes for questions, and while you're doing that, just make sure you keep your question brief and that it is a question. Is there anybody on the current scene that you think are doing particularly good music at the moment?
Oh, there are a lot of people. Talent never leaves the gene pool. It just becomes harder to find them in the hue and cry. I like, there's a girl named Duffy who's Welsh, and she's like an R&B singer. I love her. I love Amy Winehouse. We lost her. She was the one that got away. I love her. She was great, you know. I think Adele is, I'm talking about mainstream here. I think Adele is an amazing singer. She's wonderful and a real breath of fresh air. And I also love this girl, Janelle Monáe, because she's beautiful, and I like the way she styles, and I love the way she performs, and she's a really good singer. But she's demanding a certain kind of respect out there, you know, for her body and for her image as a woman. And she's real clear about it. And I like that a lot. It's a lesson for Miley Cyrus, you know. I mean, I'm not criticizing her. I feel bad for her, you know, but she needs her mom to tell her that, you know.
I can see why you haven't thought about politics.
It's important. It's important to have dignity. It's important to have self-respect. I mean, people are saying, you know, I mean, me compared to those girls, you know, I was wearing a Cub Scout suit. I mean, be serious, you know, compared to Beyonce and those girls. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, sexuality and youth are a thing to celebrate. And I don't want us to go back to those puritanical days when, you know, when that was all considered bad and dirty, you know, the whole Calvinist thing. It's ridiculous, you know, and Martin Luther, who really had a problem. Those guys really had a bad hang-up, and it kept us screwed up for a long time, I think. But you have to have dignity, and you have to have respect for your own person. And I think she's showing that.
Was there pressure on you when you were doing these posters and on stage to wear shorter and shorter skirts?
No, there was more pressure to wear a longer skirt. I went to work for grad night for Walt Disney and you know, Disneyland, and they said, well, you had to kneel on something, and it was like the Catholic school, you know, where your uniform skirt had to be a certain length. And so they put that in the contract that if I knelt someplace, my skirt wouldn't be too short. I mean, the biggest problem I had with short skirts was I had this striped dress that I used to wear to sing in. And I wore it on the Johnny Cash show, I remember. It was the last time I ever wore it. And it was a Betsy Johnson dress, and it was just a great dress for singing because I kept it in my purse because, you know, the airlines would always lose your luggage. So I'd carry it in my purse so I'd always have something to wear when I got to the gig. And I could, you know, we moved fast. There was no money to pay for dry cleaning or anything like that. It was supposed to be dry cleaned. So I washed it in the sink. But it was made out of some strange kind of synthetic material and just kept shrinking and shrinking. And pretty soon, it was like, I can't wear this anymore. My mother wouldn't let me out of the house, you know. So I had to throw that away, but that was it. After that, I wore pants.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Hi.
Advanced copy of the book. It was fantastic. I read it in one day.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, it's a short book. It's only 135 pages.
Have to admit, I had 3 posters of you on the wall in college, and I have a question that I think a lot of people in this audience may have.
What's
How
that?
are you not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? What a disgrace.
I'm not really sure, and I don't care, but a long time ago I was asked to somehow participate in one of their festivities. I'm just not very interested in prizes. I'm glad to have them, you know. I mean, I you know, just to give you an idea of it, the first Grammy that I won, I left in a rent-a-car. And I was glad that I got it, and I'm grateful to, you know, one always likes to have one's work acknowledged, but prizes are not what's important to me. And years ago, I was invited to participate in one of their festivities, and I declined. And the president of my record company was there, and he said, Linda, if you don't do this, you'll never be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I went, so what? So, you know, maybe the word got back to them. I don't know. I don't care. You know, it's not important to me.
It's a crime.
Okay, it's not a crime. It really doesn't matter. I wouldn't go anyway. I don't like prize shows. Oh, okay. Oh, that we're taking turns. Okay.
Good morning,
Hi, in the
Linda.
green
How are
shirt.
you?
Hi.
In 1978, I wrote you a fan letter, which I sent to your dad, courtesy of the hardware store. Did you ever get it? I still have the
poor
copy.
dad.
I still have the copy of the letter he wrote back saying he was going to talk to you. But did he ever do that?
That was nice of him. He was a nice man.
I'll show you the letter later if you want to. It's from
Okay, good.
78. Okay.
Deal.
But now, serious question, though. With all the programs you did in the 70s and such, what was Hugh Hefner like?
I didn't really know him. I just did his TV show for about a minute and a half. You know, he had all these chicks around. I remember I sang Long Time, and all the little Playboy girls started to cry, and I said, I think maybe that's going to be a hit. You know, made all the bunnies started to cry. But he, you know, he had he had a magazine that included, it was like Vanity Fair is now, you know, where it had a lot of blingy, she stuff, and then it had a couple of serious articles, you know, like Christopher Hitchens. You could have Christopher Hitchens. Vanity Fair was my guilty pleasure at the hairdresser, and when they got Christopher Hitchens, I actually got a subscription. So, you know, there are magazines like that. I think he tried to have a little bit more varied sensibility, but you have to realize he was working out of the early 60s when sex was just something that was just like way over there stuffed into somebody's panty girdle. It wasn't allowed out, you know. And that needed to be addressed. They went a little overboard, but really, you know, maybe it'll right itself in the next century. I don't know.
Thank you very much. God bless.
Hey, good morning.
Hi.
I felt like we were shorted of getting information about your childhood and that early background. So I'm very curious if you could just talk more about that. You said, you know, musical background. I'm wondering, did you study music, go to college? Where'd you grow up?
I did study music. I don't read music to this day. I'm really pretty. You know, if I were going to give advice to somebody, I'd say be a little bit more prepared than I was. You don't have to read. Reading comes from a part of your brain that isn't necessarily the creative part. It's a useful tool, but it's not an end in any way, shape, or form. And I find that when I'm forced to read, it puts me in a different part of my brain that keeps me from connecting to the emotional part of my story. But that's not that way for everybody. You know, those studio players that are just great, that are great readers, they can do everything. You know, that's why a virtuoso is a virtuoso, because they have all those skills and they can do everything really well and tell the brilliant story that's so evocative it makes you fall on your knees and cry, which is what music is supposed to do, you know. I mean, I always say if music can't make you cry, then you're a hopeless case. So, and it's my job to make you cry. I don't cry very much myself, but that's my job. It used to be my job. Oh, they're over there. I keep
Hi,
forgetting.
Linda.
Hi.
Did you write any of your own songs?
I did. I wrote a song called Try Me Again, and I wrote another song for a movie called Winter Light. But I'm not writing is not what I do. That's a separate gift, and I think there's some people that are really compelled to write. And I was just in an area that had such a rich pool of songwriters. I just thought, why bother with mine? You know, I can go straight to George Gershwin, Rodgers and Hart, J.D. Souther, you know, Jackson Browne. I got the cream here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Linda. I'm from Tucson.
Oh, good.
And your brother Mike is one of my best friends. And Dan Buckley and Big Jim send their love.
Oh, those guys. I love those
And
guys.
Thank you very much for being on the committee for the new mariachi documentary about mariachis in Tucson.
Oh, great.
And the Ronstadt family has added so much to our town. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's really nice. It's hard to miss us there. There are a lot of Ronstadts. One of my uncles had 12 children, and they all went and had children of their own, so you can imagine what it's like. It's like a herd of rabbits out there. Hi. Oh, this is one over here.
Hi, Linda. I was hoping you could share a fond memory or an anecdotal story of when you worked with Emmylou and Dolly when you were recording Trio. I love that album.
Well, it's hard to say a certain anecdote. I'm trying to think what it would be, but what it really was that I'd met Dolly. I saw her singing on the Grand Ole Opry when I went with Randy Scruggs. He took me to see it when it was still at the Ryman Auditorium, and I was standing backstage watching Dolly sing. And she was a wonder to behold. I mean, she's one of those girls that if you take away the wigs and the makeup and wash all the mascara and the hot false eyelashes off and everything like that, what you have in front of you is one of the most beautiful girls you've ever seen. You know, she's just gorgeous. She doesn't need even a shred of makeup, but she likes it, so she puts it on. So she was standing there with all this stuff and really tall hair, and she had on a dress with a big skirt, lots of petticoats, and I just went, "Whoa, look at that," you know. And then she started to, and I was dressed kind of like I am today, you know, in a T-shirt and a pair of jeans. I didn't have the hoodie on. I think it was summertime. But at any rate, she came over, and I talked to her, and I thought she was completely charming. When she opened her mouth and started to sing, I fell on the floor. She's an amazing singer. Dolly Parton is a great singer. So I was delighted to meet her, and I liked this record that she'd made called Jolene. I thought it was a really good record. She'd written it, you know. So I told Emmylou about her, and then Emmy met her somehow through some other thing, you know. Probably she went to the Ryman one night and met her too. But she called me up from home one time. Emmy was living in L.A., and she called me, and she said, "Dolly Parton's at my house. You have to come over." So I was living like 40 minutes away, you know, at the beach. And I said, "Okay, I'm coming right away." And I got there in 20 minutes. And So I sat down and we started to sing. And again, that's what musicians do. We always do that when we're touring, when we're hanging out, when we're whatever. We're always playing and singing. Well, of course, Amy got her guitar out. We started to sing right away. And we were shocked, you know, because there was this sound that was different from anything that we'd heard. We thought it was really good. And we just went, wow, we got to do more of that, you know. So then we thought, well, we'd like to make a record together. But, of course, the record company didn't want to hear about that because it was too complicated. And it really is hard to get 3 different record companies and 3 different careers together. But we managed to do it eventually, and we managed to make 2 records. It was like, you know, it was like moving heaven and earth to do that, but we did it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Linda. I'm going to make you feel old because we met 40
feel
years
old.
ago. I worked at the New York Academy of Music. You were there with David Bowie, and you were with somebody in a stroller. Does that remind do you remember that?
I don't remember. David Bowie and was in the stroller?
No. There was a baby in a stroller, and you were looking after it. And
Was it my baby?
No, I think it was David's, and I think it was for either Iggy Pop or Lou Reed back in '73.
I don't think that was me. I think you maybe
No,
mixed it
that-
with
that-
Nico, maybe Nico.
No, that was definitely you.
Okay.
But my question is, before you were diagnosed with the Parkinson's, was there any truth to the rumor that you were going to get back together with some of the guys, Souther Hillman, Furay, and Henley, and do a tour?
Well, no, there was no truth to that rumor. We didn't tour together that much. I mean, we never did Souther Hillman, Furay. I never toured with them.
Well, I know they wrote some of your songs.
That was another girl too.
And are you still in touch with little Irving?
With who?
Irving Azoff.
Oh, Irving Azoff. Well, I was never that close to Irving Azoff. I haven't seen him for maybe 40 years or 30 years, I think.
Yeah, it's about the same.
I mean, I
with me.
like him. We were talking one night, and he said to me, I think we were at the Saturday Night Live show, hanging out in the backstage, and he asked me a question, I answered, and he said, "Linda, you're so normal. How do you be so normal?" So that's what I named my music company. Then it was Normal Music.
Oh, you should have asked Irving why he's so short.
Well, that's a thing that we don't tolerate very well in this culture, but it's kind of silly when you think about it. Now, it's not like you have a deliberate choice over whether you're short or tall. It's interesting. In Mexico, if you're short, it's just because you're short, you know. And if you're tall, they call you shorty, they call you fatty, they call you skinny. You know, it's not an insult. It's just a kind of an acknowledgement of what you are. But it doesn't. After that, your value is decided on its merit, not on your height. It's a kind of a weird thing to do to people in this country.
Okay, thank you. And it's sorry to know that you're not going to be able to tour again.
No, I'm not going to tour, but thank you anyway.
Hello,
there's
hello,
Ed.
Linda.
Hi.
My family is from the Benson and Tucson area as well.
Oh, really?
So having the Mexican music and
The
all
Lucky
the music,
Horseshoe Cafe.
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
My mother's no longer here, but on behalf of my mother, we're grateful for canciones because we always listened to them, and she handed me the first cassette.
Well, de nada.
And then her favorite rendition, I'm sure she took it wherever she is in the other place, Tata Dios. She would cry. when
Oh,
she
I
heard
cry
that.
when I hear that song too. That's a sacred, special
It is
song.
She said, now this is the voice of your generation, and look how she's handling these songs. Of course, she said it all in Spanish, you know, but yeah,
great.
yeah, but it was
Well,
wonderful.
I would hand that honor over to Lola Beltran. I think she
I
was
know.
the great one. And Amalia Mendoza also.
We heard
Lucha
them all.
Reyes.
We
They
heard
were
them
pretty
all.
good. Yeah.
We heard them all. Remember the house parties where you take the lab shades off so they could do the moving pictures? We did the
Exactly.
same thing at home.
Right.
And thank you for the concert over at what was called the Nissan Pavilion. I dragged my 6th grade son with me to see you, and he was a fan forever.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions. I'm sorry, we'll have one from here and one from here. I'm sorry about the rest of you, but she will be signing books later.
Okay, so.
Thanks for being here today first. I would echo the previous questioner's comment about Trio and what a great collaboration that was. But one of the ones that intrigued me the most was your collaboration with Nelson Riddle on the classics. What led to that?
Well, I was singing Pirates every day, and we were doing 8 shows a week, and I was singing only one, you know, I was just singing the same music, and I loved it, but I had to start working on something else just so I could have some variety. And I ran into this guy, Jerry Wexler, who's a great record man. You know, worked for Atlantic Records. He was one of the pillars of Atlantic Records. He had a killer record collection. I said, I want to come over and start listening to some of your records and start learning some songs, because I wanted to improve my phrasing. And what I always would do was I would study, when I would take on some genre of music, which at that point I was singing, you know, mainstream pop music, I'd listen to what came before it so that I could improve my phrasing. So I thought, well, what came before my mainstream pop music, which was rock and roll, was American standard songs. And I thought the songs were, for instance, mostly better than the things that I was singing and the things that I was finding to sing, because they're so beautifully crafted. If the American culture gave anything to the world at large, it was the American popular song, probably the most significant cultural contribution to the world at large. So, and the zenith of the American popular song is truly, you know, from the 20s through to the middle 50s, when the Gershwins, Rodgers and Hart, you know, Irving Berlin, all these incredibly great songwriters were writing these songs that were crafted so that there was something for everybody. There was, you know, sentiment, there was heartbreak, there was concern and worry about, you know, the economy crashing, or where your future was going to be if you're an immigrant. And there was also an intellectual component too, for anybody that wants. It's kind of like, I like to compare that era to Bette Midler. You know, she had a tour that she did called Thighs and Whispers. Well, you know, it's fine if, you know, Thighs and Whispers, because she had a lot of girls and stuff like that, but also if you're a Bergman fan, you know, you get that extra level of it. So that's what the Gershwins could do, and they did that musically too, to a great degree. So there was this incredible complex mesh of different cultural influences that were completely created by the fact that we were a country that was welcomed to immigrants. We allowed immigrants to come in and find their place in the economic pie, and we allowed them to prosper, which is what people from Mexico and Guatemala and Salvador would be doing right now, and people from Liberia and Libya and all these people that are coming in from all these different places. We need to help them find their place, because otherwise we're driving them into the shadows, and we drive them into crime, and we drive them into generations of crime. And a great precedent for that is the black migration, the African-American black migration that happened from the beginning of the century all the way up until through the 40s and 50s. Well, actually, it happened all the way up into through the 60s, too. They were fleeing the Jim Crow laws, and they came up north. And they didn't have Jim Crow to deal with, but they had that economic door slammed in their face. And it's an example of what we need to not do. I don't know why this country doesn't learn, but we need to open the doors for everybody and make it easier. That's what I think. Anyway, go
we
ahead.
have time for one last question, and then we'll have some closing remarks here, and then she will be signing books a little bit later.
Okay. Hi.
Good morning, Linda.
Hi.
Welcome to our hometown. You said it's your job to make us cry by your singing, which has often brought a lump to my throat, particularly the last high note of Blue Bayou. Tell me how you prepared and how you chose to sing that note and hold it so long.
Puro Mexicano. That's a style. There's a style called huapango that is in Mexican music and Mexican traditional music, where you, instead of trying to go through the passaggio like you do in classical music, where you don't emphasize the break in the voice, you purposely emphasize that yodely break in the voice and break into falsetto, and it gives a kind of a thrilling, emotional rush, and that's what I was doing. In fact, it was so Mexican what I was doing that I recorded the song in Spanish too, but the translation wasn't very good, so I made a lot of mistakes. Actually, the translation was fine, but when I copied it, I made a lot of spelling errors, and so I wound up, and tense errors, so I wound up sounding like a hermaphrodite in a time machine, you know. It was a little weird. They were annoyed about it in Spain. They didn't mind too much in Mexico because they kind of knew me, and they knew I was one of their homegirls. But at any rate, that was completely my Mexican influence.
When you've been given this amazing gift of a voice, and that one that's been given to all of us, and something comes along like Parkinson's to take it away, how do you cope with that?
Well, I have to keep reminding myself that I had an unusually long turn at the trough. And, you know, I had a lot of chances to do things that other people don't ever get, and I have to be content with that. I have to look around for some other way to make myself useful.
just a little bit about what you might be doing to make yourself useful in the coming years?
Well, I work with a group called Los Ensontles, and they're a culture. It's a little cultural center in the East Bay in Northern California, in Richmond, which is a pretty funky neighborhood, and they have a lot of immigrant kids there, and they're with extreme culture shock. They don't know quite how to place themselves. They come from this place called Mexico, and they wind up in this place called the United States, and they don't know quite who to be. And this little place is, and there's no art education, in case you haven't noticed. The Republicans don't ever want to fund the arts. I know because I came here and talked to them on behalf of Arts for Children and Education, and they were not very interested. But and they haven't coughed up the bucks subsequently. But I keep hoping they'll have some enlightenment. But anyway, this one place teaches these kids really, really deep traditional Mexican music, how to play the instruments, how to sing, how to dance, and they teach them visual art also, brilliant visual art. And the kids have a tremendous record of staying in high school, going on to college, staying out of gangs, not getting pregnant, no teenage pregnancies. And they don't feel as bad. They have a place to go that's theirs, where they can kind of, they can define themselves. They don't have to go out and get a tattoo in order to find out who they are. So I've been working with them for about 20 years, and I've just started devoting all my time to that right now. I go over there, I go to their rehearsals. They have a performing group, but they don't teach kids music so that they can get up on stage like trained seals and perform. They teach them music so that they can use it in their social lives, they can use it to process their feelings. That's what art is for, to help us work out our feelings. And so they can have something to, how they can define themselves in their community and their culture.
Well, Linda Ronstadt, thank you for helping us work out our feelings.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.